Jane's presentation, as you see, is Write Well and Prosper. This discussion group is hosted by the Management and Economics Society of CIM. And as you see, our discussion groups are free and open to anyone. But if you're not a member, we'd love to have you join CIM National and choose MES as your preferred society, or to tick the MES box if you're already a member of CIM. Just a quick note, Q&A will be handled using the chat function on your screen, and questions will be monitored as we go along, but they will be addressed to Jane at the end of the presentation. Jane's name will be familiar to many of you from her time as editor of Canadian Mining Journal, if not more recently when she was with Agnico Eagle, working on their various technical documents and disclosures. And as you see, while Jane is the speaker, she does have a co-author, Mirella Saraci, who is corporate manager, technical reporting with Agnico Eagle. Jane graduated in geology from Queen's University and has a master's degree from Carleton. As a writer and editor, she's a strong believer in clarity of technical communications and brings her varied experience as a geologist to bear on the nitty-gritty of today's topic. Words and punctuation, sentence structure, paragraphs, heads, and subheads matter! Exclamation mark. Welcome, Jane. Would you like to share your screen at this point?
Yes, I'm going to do that right now. Okay, does that look okay?
Yes, I think so.
Oh, good. Well, I'd like to thank you very much, Jane, for that introduction, and to welcome everybody who's joined the session this afternoon. I really appreciate you coming. Getting this number of people together to talk about technical writing. Wow, that's amazing. So I'll try to make it as interesting as possible. I'm very interested in this topic, and I hope you are too. I'm Jane Werniuk. I'm speaking to you from my home in Toronto. This presentation is about how to improve the quality of your technical language. It's aimed at people in various fields who are new to the mining and exploration industry or who are new to technical writing. Note that this presentation reflects my own thoughts and opinions based on a lifetime of writing. I would like to acknowledge Mirella Saraci, the co-author of this talk, who prepared the section on technical graphics. She's the corporate manager, technical reporting at Agnico Eagle Mines, where we were colleagues until I retired last year. Hang on. Here we go. These are the points that I'd like to cover today. Why good technical writing matters. Hang on, let me get the pointer going. Disclosures, what are they and who should write them? Tips on how to improve your writing. How technical graphics can enhance your communications. Ways to improve NI 43101 technical reports, and a final note on editing. Why does good technical writing matter to me? After all, I'm a geologist. Why do I care enough about it to talk about it? Well, there are a few reasons. Writing clearly and editing technical material are two of the skills I've developed over my career, and I think I can pass along to others. Technical writing is much like other types of writing, but it's best done by someone with technical training who can understand the concepts, in my opinion. Good communications are vital for the performance of exploration companies. And knowing how to both understand and communicate technical information is as important to other stakeholders as it is to the mining companies. In those other stakeholders, I refer to Indigenous landholders, nearby communities, governments, banks, legal firms, and suppliers. Why does technical writing, good technical writing matter to you? Clear, accurate communication improves the governance of your organization. This might include internal reports and external disclosures. According to the website Investopedia, corporate governance is the system of rules, practices, and processes by which a firm is directed and controlled. Communicating a firm's corporate governance is a key component of community and investor relations. Another reason for you to care is because technical communication improves the functions and operations, particularly the safety. The third reason to write carefully is because if you're not in the presence of another person, you're judged by your written communications, your emails, text messages, reports, and memos. And these days, the pandemic has forced us to lean very heavily on writing. A person who writes well shines. And as a technical writer, it is your job to make sure that your readers basically understand technical information in a field that may not be their specialty. There's room for good technical language in a lot of places. I've been seeing a lot of movies lately, and two that I saw recently are based on true facts, but they lean very heavily in technical fields. The movie First Man was about the life of US astronaut Neil Armstrong, who was the first person to walk on the moon. I'm no expert in spaceflight, but the dialogue in the movie helped me to understand some very technical concepts about the training and the space flights leading up to Armstrong's walk on the moon and the Apollo 11 mission in 1969. On the other hand, I was left quite confused about the technical issues in the movie Deepwater Horizon. This movie was about the missteps and poor decisions leading up to the disastrous explosion of an offshore oil rig in the Gulf of Mexico in 2010. The screenwriter could have made it more clear. Now, you ask, what does baseball have to do with technical writing? And here's where you get the answer. I've been following a lot of baseball lately, and some of you may know that the World Series first game was last night. I've been reading articles about the games in the newspaper, and I could not help noticing that in interviews, some professional sports people lack clarity. Here are a couple of great quotes that appeared in an article in the Globe and Mail newspaper the morning before the two strongest teams in the National League, the Los Angeles Dodgers and the San Francisco Giants, met to decide who would move into the quarterfinals in Major League Baseball this year. The excitement of the moment apparently caused a number of players on the two teams to speak baseball too eloquently. And fortunately, their interviews were captured word for word in the article. So I'm going to read you these two quotations, and then we'll come back to them later in the talk. The first is from Mookie Betts, who is a right fielder with the Los Angeles Dodgers. We've had a lot, and here he is, Mookie, reaching for a ball at the outfield wall. We've had a lot of success here, and in the past 4, 5, 6, whatever years. And I think one of the biggest things is there's teams that it's disappointing if we don't get there. And I think we're one of those, and there's teams that operate out of, we want to get here. And there's teams that it's disappointing if we don't get there. And I think we're one of those teams that it's disappointing if we don't get there. I think that's a little unclear. What is he trying to say? He's obviously enthusiastic, as you can see from the picture. And the other player that was quoted was Buster Posey, who's the catcher with San Francisco Giants. And I'd like to say that if my name were Buster Posey, I would be playing Major League Baseball too, because that is a fabulous baseball name. This is what he said. This time of year, you're going to face great pitching night in and night out. And as much as you can, you're hoping that when you do get some traffic out there, you can get a big hit. And because sometimes those opportunities are limited, and hopefully that's something we will be able to do on Thursday. A little fuzzy. So we will get back to that and clarify later in the presentation. Aside from the movie and baseball business, your technical writing is likely to be in internal company reports or external disclosures. Obviously, the stakes are higher when something is disclosed to the public. What are disclosures? We go back to the website Investopedia for a definition. Disclosure is the process of making facts or information known to the public. Proper disclosure by corporations is the act of making its customers, investors, and any people involved in doing business with the company aware of pertinent information. And I add to that definition that disclosures include any information that is reported outside the company, such as written reports, news releases, websites, content, and presentations, both slides and verbal. Many of these disclosures include technical information. Who should write a company's disclosures? To me, it makes sense that technically educated people should write the technical information in a disclosure. When written by non-experts, technical information is often not clear unless that person has been well trained on the job. Before any disclosure is released, the technical information in it must be verified and approved by an appropriate technical person. And for resource companies listed on a Canadian exchange, that person is called a qualified person. The rules for disclosure vary from one jurisdiction to another. Australasia uses the JORC code, which is the Joint Ore Reserves Committee code. Canada uses National Instrument 43101, which incorporates the CIM's definitions, standards on mineral resources and reserves. And South Africa uses the SAMREC and SAMVAL codes. Here is my caution about rules. When writing technical material, there are at least three personalities at play, pulling in different directions, pulling on the technical writer to be three different types of people. One is a scientific person. The second is a rules-bound defensive person, worried about the rules. And the third person is a sensible person. My caution is, for the benefit of readers, try as hard as you can to be the sensible person. Fight to protect your clear wording. And up on the screen, I draw your attention to three dogs who are having a discussion over a stick. And what I'd like you to do is participate just for a minute with me. Look at the picture and decide which of these three dogs is the sensible dog. And I'd like you to use the chat function right now. You'll find it somewhere on your screen. Click on the chat function. And if each of you could tell me which of the three dogs you think is the sensible one. I'll give you 30 seconds. Your choices are the black and white spotted dog, the shaggy beige dog, or the tawny colored dog on the right. 30 seconds. Got 10 seconds to go. Okay, do we have a consensus, Jane?
I say we have a consensus, and it's the middle white shaggy dog.
That's what I thought too. Okay, very good. Thanks a lot for participating, everybody. I won't make you go through that again, but I would like to tell you that you can carry on using the chat function as we go through this talk, and you can add your comments and your advice as we go through, and then we'll look at all of those comments and questions at the end of the talk. Now we come to the guts of the presentation. Tips for improving your writing. Much of the following advice is for improving all types of writing, not just technical. My best advice, my number one tip for improving your writing is to improve your reading. Read more well-written newspapers, reports, magazines, and literature to expand your vocabulary and your expressions. And what everybody reads is different depending what they like and what they turn to. I turn to the novels of great authors, such as The Old Man and the Sea, which I recently reread by Ernest Hemingway. And for my husband, it's The Economist Weekly news magazine. How much importance do you place on your writing? Attitude is very important. Most of us were taught in school how to write properly, but some people think it's no longer important. It's time to change that attitude. Good writing is more important at work than it was at school. Put yourself in the reader's place. You have something really important to say in this report or email, so you should do everything you can to make that information clear, brief, and easy to digest for your reader. Here's an example. In a news release about an exploration project, every single time you talk about it, you put out a news release about a project, you should specify the country, the province, the county, and the township, or whatever it takes to locate the project and ensure that the reader knows where it is. Here's an example of a bad attitude for writing, which is unfortunately common. When applying for a job, many people take the time to update their resume, which is great, but then they send it off without taking the time to check it. An executive at a top mining consulting firm recently complained to me about the large number of error-ridden applications that she receives from job seekers. Her firm cannot afford to hire anyone who doesn't bother to check their own writing. What would a mining client think if its consultants' reports were riddled with errors? If the mining company disclosed that information, what would their investors think? It would tarnish the company's reputation and cause it to potentially lose future employees. Now, I'm going to look in more detail at writing. I'll start by talking about words and pace. Choose the right words. The devil is in figuring out what word is right. So choose the right words and then punctuate them as though you were speaking, not writing. So here's a few of my thoughts on choosing words. One word is better than two or three or four. However, occasionally it's better to have a little redundancy or say the same thing in two different ways to make sure that it is well understood. A shorter word is better if it is the correct word, but complex words and jargon are okay if they are necessary and if you include a definition of them in a glossary in that document. Use commas and hyphens as tools for pacing to make the meaning absolutely clear. I test a sentence by saying it out loud. This helps me decide which words need to be joined by a hyphen, which is usually to form a one-word adjective such as fine-grained, and where commas are needed to force a pause. I'll give an example of this in a minute. Next, let's look at the structure of sentences. If a sentence is long and complex, it's hard to determine if it's correct grammatically. A method to check this is to work out the parts of the sentence, or parse the sentence, into subject, verb, object, and clauses. And then use that to make sure that the tense and the number of the verb and the pronouns are correct. Knowing the parts of the sentence, you can simplify it to check the forms of the pronouns and verbs to make sure what you've written is actually correct. I have a confession to make. I don't remember most of the terms for grammar anymore, and that's okay. As a working writer and editor, all I need to know is subject, verb, object, clauses, and maybe pronoun, and I need to understand how the different parts of a sentence work together. Here's an example where I simplify a sentence chosen from my undergrad thesis, which was written a few decades ago. Here's the original sentence. These rocks can be described in the field as fine to medium-grained dark gray to light gray-green rocks, characterized by mineral banding millimeters to centimeters in width that shows small-scale folds and faults. Figure 6. Yikes. This is not a pretty sentence, and I'm not proud of it, but I think we can improve this. So, as I say it out loud, the worst part of this sentence seems to be the highlighted words "that shows." Is that even correct? Let's find out. So I color-coded the words, and you can follow my analysis. The subject is rocks in red. The verb is can be described in green. Let's see. The object is as rocks. And the object rocks has a descriptive clause characterized by banding. And the descriptive clause has its own descriptive clause that shows folds and faults. So I'm going to strip away all the words that are just the extra words. I'm going to look just at those colored words to form it, to simplify it down. And that comes to this. These rocks can be described as rocks characterized by banding that shows folds and faults. And the word "that" can be replaced by the word "banding" that it replaces. So the final phrase, banding shows folds and faults, means that my 23-year-old self was actually correct in using the words "that shows." But it's still not a great sentence. A long sentence can be broken into 2 or 3 sentences to make it easier to understand. For the example, I'll go back to the same sentence I just looked at from my thesis. We're going to break it into 2 sentences for clarity. And once it's broken, then we're going to rewrite the 2 sentences to improve them. Broken into 2 sentences, this is how it reads. In outcrop, these rocks are fine to medium grained and dark gray to light gray green. Period. They are characterized by mineral banding, millimeters to centimeters in width, that shows small scale folds and faults. Figure 6. This is not a pretty sentence, but I think it's an improvement. So we can say that I've learned something over these years, I hope. Note my use of commas and hyphens to clarify meaning. I've just cleaned it up a bit, only because those hyphens, those commas help in understanding, I believe. Now let's look at a larger scale. You should use paragraphs and flow to create a logical structure to help your reader understand your description or argument. Do the sentences lie in a logical order? Are the paragraphs split in logical place? Introduce one thought at the start of each paragraph and complete that thought within that paragraph. By moving sentences and paragraphs into a more logical order, you may uncover repetition and unnecessary sentences that should be cut out. The ultimate test is this. Does the sentence, the paragraph, or the section say what you want it to say as simply as possible? The same tools can be applied to improve clarity in other uses of language. Back to our baseball player quotations. Mookie Betts is an incredible athlete, but his main problems in this quotation are a run-on sentence and fuzzy, uncareful language. We can clarify his sentence by breaking it down into two sentences, figuring out what it is he means, and then saying this directly, hopefully without losing his passion. So I don't want to reread this for you, so I'm just going to read you the clarified version, and the presentation will be up on the website, so you can go back and have a stab at making it better if you want. But here's what I think is an improved quotation for Mookie. We've had a lot of success in postseason play in the last several years. One of the biggest reasons for the success of teams like ours is that we don't just want to get to the playoffs. We'll be disappointed if we don't get there. I can't do his accent, but I'm sure you can figure it. And then let's move on to Buster Posey's quote. His main problems is the use of the word traffic is very jargony, and there's some long-winded phrases. So I think I've cleaned it up for clarity, and this is the result. In playoff baseball, you're going to face great pitching in every game. As a hitter, you're hoping that when you do get a pitch in your zone, you can get a big hit because those opportunities are limited. I hope we can do that in Thursday's game. It should be admitted that brevity is not usually seen as desirable in baseball player interviews. However, clarity should be valued in every use of language, including baseball. In case you are wondering, shortly after these interviews, the Dodgers won the series against the Giants, and then a few days later, the Dodgers were knocked out of the playoffs, so neither of the teams made it to the playoffs. They're not in the World Series. The use of reference documents. Using a style guide and a dictionary as reference documents will save you time and make your writing more consistent and reader-friendly. A style guide is a system of spelling, punctuation, and word use that removes the burden of decision-making from you. There are many ways to spell or capitalize certain words, use commas and hyphens, but if you mix the different ways in one document, it looks messy. Likewise, if you do not stick with one style for an organization, there is confusion. Avoid the confusion by mandating one dictionary and one style guide for all the writing in your organization. My personal favorites are the Canadian Oxford Dictionary and the Canadian Press Style Book. For geological terms, I use the American Geosciences Institute Glossary of Geology, but you should choose the ones that make sense for you and your organization. Do not rely on spell check and Google. The spell check function does not understand technical language, and Google will send you to whatever dictionary it wants, and that's just confusing. A very important aspect of technical documents is their design, which is especially important in large documents such as technical reports. The references tool in your word processing software is a great time saver, especially if you use it from the early stages of writing. Use the references tool to link your figure and table references in the text to their captions so that the numbering of the tables and figures automatically updates whenever you add or delete figures or tables. And the lists of figures and tables also update automatically. Likewise, use the text level tool for the hierarchy of headings, subheadings, body text, and caption fonts so that each is consistent and the table of contents will update automatically. I recommend that you use a numbering system for heads and subheads to remove confusion. For example, item 2.3.2 is the second subsection of the third section in item 2. And item 2 is just another way of saying chapter 2. I also recommend that the figure and table numbering reflect the number of the item or chapter. For example, table 2.3 is the third table in item 2. For a long technical report, before you join the items together to make the full report, you may want to strip away all the existing formatting in each item so you can reset it to be consistent in style throughout. If the document has several authors, ask them to supply their tables in a formatable form, such as in Word or Excel, and supply the captions of the graphics separately from the image. This way you can have consistent formatting in the tables and the captions. The person formatting the final document will need to check and double check the tables to make sure that no errors have been introduced in the reformatting, and make sure that the original author also has a chance to check any reformatted tables. Here's my last tip for improving technical writing, and it does not relate to writing at all, but to graphics. Written technical information is often enhanced by well-prepared technical graphics. Maps are great visual tools for at all stages of a mineral property. They should be prepared by geologists and mining engineers. Better maps can be made today with the availability of geographic data and cartographic visualization software. The types of illustrations that you can use include two-dimensional plans and sections and three-dimensional isometric views. For non-technical people, I'll just say that a plan is another word for map, and a section is an image that shows one horizontal direction and another vertical direction, so that you're actually looking into the earth from the side. An isometric view is from an angle that's neither above nor the side, but it's an oblique angle. Technical graphics are an integral part of technical reports, and they're governed by their own set of instructions. This table shows the common elements that are required in maps at all stages of mineral projects, following the NI 43-101 instructions. Title of property, legend, inset map with location, borders, visual hierarchy, arrow indicating north, scale bar or grid form, coordinate system and projection used in the map, effective graphical design, and the purpose. I will comment on two of them. Again, please use the chat feature to add your ideas about making better graphics. The purpose. All maps have a purpose, and that should influence every element in the map and its layout. There are several things to consider for effective graphical design. Layout design refers to the planning and decision-making processes involved in the visual display of spatial data. A balance can be achieved by rearranging the different map elements, such as the north arrow, a legend, a scale, and a title, and changing the size of the text and borders, and of course colors. The map and map elements should be neatly drawn, appropriately and consistently generalized, symmetrically balanced, and without unnecessary clutter. And our minds should be like that too. But that's an aside. The next three slides show technical graphics that have been prepared by Agnico Eagle Mines. The text points on each side are taken from the NI 43-101 instructions for maps and sections for projects at different stages. The first slide is an example of an exploration stage project. In this map of Agnico Eagle's Santa Gertrudis gold exploration project in Mexico, the mountainous terrain is shown by subtle gray shading which is beneath the colors, which are the geological units. The image shows a location map, a legend, and all the elements required to show directions and distances. The red lines indicate known mineral deposits. Next are graphics from an advanced exploration project. These three images are from the Upper Beaver Gold Project in Agnico Eagle's Kirkland Lake project in Northeast Ontario, including a regional geology map on the left, a local geology map in the middle, and a longitudinal section on the right with an inset cross section. You can see again a location map, the legend, and all the required elements of distances and directions. As well, the longitudinal section shows the deposit's reported mineral resources in gray and their mineral reserves in orange. Finally are the graphics for properties that are under development or in production. This example is from the Canadian Malartic open pit gold mine in northwest Quebec, jointly owned by Agnico Eagle and Yamana Gold. On the left is the local geology map, and on the right is a longitudinal section with an inset cross section. Both the map and the section show the outline of the mine pit. There's the pit in the map, and there's the pit bottom on the section. The mineral resources are shown in gray on the longitudinal section. In my most recent work, I coordinated the production of Agnico Eagle's 43-101 technical reports over a 10-year period. And here are the most important things that I learned about improving this process. And I learned from scratch. I didn't know anything about technical reports when I started that job. But don't tell the people at Agnico that. The 43-101 disclosure rule requires that public reporting of technical information is understandable to a reasonably informed investor, not an engineer, not a geologist. Don't dumb it down, but make sure it is clear enough for this reader with no unnecessary extra information. The summary section at the start of the document is short and upfront. It is the most read and therefore the most important part of the report. All data and information in the document must be internally consistent. It should be the job of one person to ensure this. And what I'm referring to is, for example, if toward the end of the report, you're talking about an internal, an IRR, internal rate of recovery, is that right? Anyway, if you're talking about a number in the financial section of the report, that same number has to be reflected in the summary of the report and throughout. Wherever it's used, it has to be consistent. It should be one person's job to go through at the end and make sure that those numbers are consistent throughout. It's an important step to send the edited, designed pages back to the original author so he or she can check for errors or omissions. The biggest takeaway from my work on technical reports is the importance of using a technical report template. A systematic order and location of information. Making all of a company's technical reports consistent from year to year and from project to project. A person can turn to subsection 14.2.3 and know what to expect to find there. This makes it easier for the writers to ensure that all the required information is there in a logical location and that the reports are easier to read and use. Note that many mining companies do not produce their own technical reports in-house, but they have them written by consultants. This ensures a certain standard quality, but the technical reports will probably follow the template developed by the consultant. My last slide is about editing. For me, it's often difficult to separate the ideas of writing and editing. A technical disclosure is usually prepared by a team of people. Every member of the team should contribute by checking the text, the graphics, and the format, and commenting on any mistakes or inconsistency they find before the final approval. Editing is a team sport, but it should not be a blood sport. The intention should be to improve the document for the ultimate reader. The result should be the author's work, but better. I'll close with an anecdote from early in my editing career. My first full-time job after completing my master's degree was doing the scientific editing of geological reports and memoirs for a provincial geological survey. I knew nothing about professional editing, so I asked my boss how to correct the author's work. He handed me several red grease pencils. This was in the days of editing on paper. And he showed me a few editing marks, and they're displayed on this slide in red. On the left, we have the long strike through cross-bedded, and that's the deletion symbol. Next is the capital A with a line through it, and that means take it down from capital and make it a lowercase. Next is a lowercase a with 3 lines under it. That means capitalize that A. Next is the funny shaped H, which is an insert. To the right of that is an insert a comma. To the right of that is insert an apostrophe. To the right of that is the number or the hashtag symbol, and that means insert a space. And then is a period surrounded by a circle, which means insert a period or a full stop. And then the backward P means start a new paragraph at this position. So it was nice to be able to look professional, having professional looking red marks on the paper. But the following 2 years on that job taught me something much more important. The best results of editing come from a respectful dialogue and negotiation between the author and the editor. An editor has to understand and support the writer, who is often insecure, while making sure that the meaning of the final document is both correct and clear. There have to be trade-offs. More often than not, the author will love the result, in my experience. Thank you very much for listening to me. I really appreciate your time. And now it's time for us to have a dialogue. So let's ask Jane Spooner to have a look for your comments and questions in the chat feature and see where they take us. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Jane. I've been interested to see that a lot of the comments actually relate to style and usage and the sources of guidance. Now, just to backtrack, you mentioned the Canadian Oxford Dictionary and then a couple of others that you said were your preferred publications.
Mm-hmm.
And I wonder whether you might just repeat those.
Sure. Yeah, it's not written in the thing, but my personal favorites: Canadian Oxford Dictionary, the Canadian Press Style Book, and you can buy that from the Canadian Press on King Street in Toronto, or I'm sure you can order it online, and you could probably get an online version. It comes in both a style guide and a caps and spelling book. The caps and spelling is particularly for capitalizations and spellings of certain common words, and the style guide is for the bigger issues, like the use of the word which or that, and use of commas, and anyway, that I found that useful when I was working at Canadian Mining Journal, and then I brought that with me to Agnico Eagle. It's a well-respected and well-used style guide in Canada. And then the third thing I used was my geological terms dictionary, which is the AGI, Glossary of Geology. AGI stands for American Geosciences Institute.
Okay, great. I wanted to go back to that because we have a comment from Michael Medding saying Grammarly is your friend. Cheap, gives excellent spell and grammar checking, at least in English. And then Dennis Waddington asks, how is it with technical terms, or at least in English? To which Michael has replied, it's quite good. Also helps with sentence structure based on type of audience, which you can define. So this is an online tool. So I wondered if you had a comment on that. And then Brian Pullman, just as an extra, also put in, there's a great book, Eats, Shoots and Leaves by Lynn Truss, which I also know about. So I wondered whether you'd like to comment on Grammarly and Eats, Shoots and Leaves. Have I missed out anything that anybody else suggested?
Is it okay with you if I stop sharing my screen and then I can have a
Yeah,
look?
sure.
Yes.
Yes.
Okay, let me try that and then. Okay, let me look at these chat things. I don't know Grammarly. I'm sorry. Everybody here probably is a writer of some sort, and you've all got your favorite things. I would just recommend that you use something that's well accepted, so that you know, so the majority of other people can go along with your choices. And then once you've made a choice, be consistent and use it year after year. So I've gone through too many different freelance type jobs where I had to build a new dictionary of terms for every single job, and that's such a waste of time. So but I'm sorry, I don't know Grammarly. I can't comment on that.
Okay.
If the majority of you think it's good, go for it.
I haven't used it, so I don't know. But I think this is a useful discussion of the various tools that are available. Dennis Waddington also asks, or says, I think a big challenge is writing to sound like speaking, or speaking that doesn't sound like formal speaking. And then he says, meant to say speaking that doesn't sound like reading formally written material. In other words, I think how to make your written material actually sound conversational while maintaining the technical integrity and without it sounding like you're sort of making an oration. Do you have any tips for that?
Thanks for your question and comments, Dennis. I haven't had this problem. I mean, anybody can make themselves sound formal. You just have to sound like your most formal prof. Just put yourself in their shoes, and that's how you would write or speak. And the same thing could be, anybody could sound like a baseball player if that's your intent. I mean, you can, maybe it's sort of acting, putting yourself into a role or a character. In my opinion, the best writing and the best speaking are the simplest and clearest. The professors that I most admired and the research scientists that I worked with at the Geological Survey that I most admired were the people that were just very, very clear, succinct communicators, and they didn't sound stuffy, and they didn't sound scientific, and they didn't sound formal, because really the intent is should never be to impress. It should be to communicate, just so that a person can say back to you what you said, showing that they understood it. So.
Mm-hmm. But do you think this also goes back to your comment about reading your text?
Oh, for
as a
sure.
means to edit.
For sure. I guess it's nice if you've got a private office where you can read things out loud and it doesn't bother anybody, but it never stopped anybody at the Northern Miner when I was working by them. I'm saying everything out loud. It's absolutely the easiest way, maybe the most annoying, but the easiest way to check. And if you're getting tongue-tied, then it's time to do a little editing because your reader you're going to lose them mid-sentence. So you got to, break it up into another sentence, take away the 4-syllable word and put in a 2-syllable word.
Yeah, yeah. So I was going to ask you, when did you really start becoming interested in technical writing? Was that when as you talked, your first example of this person who gave you the red wax pencil?
No, no, it was in the Yukon. It was the August, but the 20th of August, 1981. And I was just winding up my field season and I was treed by a bear. And you need to communicate very clearly when you're up a tree, a small tree with a bear in the Yukon. And anyway, at that point, I decided I've got to find another way to earn a living. I just spent, 8 years getting educated in geology, and I decided I wanted to survive long enough to have children, and I would have to find something else to do. And so an obvious thing to do was to get involved with the with the editing side. And the first job I found after that, well, didn't hurt that industry had dried up and there were no field jobs anymore at that point. So my first job I got was technical scientific editing. And it turned out that because I've always loved writing, that wasn't hard to do. And it's unbelievable how grateful people are when you clean up their language. It's their own stuff, but it's clear, and it's just so important. So no, the grease pencils didn't make me attracted to the industry.
So along those lines, there's another question, but it's prefaced by a comment. Good disclosure is so important, and yet there's sometimes pushback from internal groups which reduce the edits to unnecessary wordsmithing. What can be done to reinforce the importance of good writing?
I guess it comes from the top. Good writing or speaking. Anybody in the hierarchy who accepts gobbledygook as something that can be disclosed, they have to be corrected. The people at the top should be the ones demanding clarity. Sometimes in a company, it's worth your while to make something a little more obscure, but that really shouldn't be the aim of any company that's worth anything. I don't know if that answers your question. I think certainly my boss at Agnico Eagle demanded better and better quality from me, and I was, reworking the wording of others. And the other thing at Agnico was that virtually every technical person, English wasn't their first language. So it's really, really hard to be both clear and brief in a language that's not your first language. That's why there was an opportunity for someone like me, who really doesn't have many other languages, to help everybody, every Francophone, every Hispanic, every Finn, to just tweak their language enough so that it was both correct and clear. So demands from the top.
Yes, yes. I think that's very much been my experience as well throughout my career. Another question, Cassidy Morgan. Do non-technical graphics have a role in technical writing, like diagrams or scenes?
by
Or cartoons, perhaps, instead of scenes.
Scenes.
Well, I'm interpreting that as maybe cartoons or graphics. So diagrams rather than strictly technical graphics.
Oh yeah, of course, absolutely. Yes, and you know, diagrams, pie charts, bar charts, all of that, you know, absolutely necessary too. Um, but they have to be clear. I mean, you really need to label everything and make sure that nothing is just slapped up. Every element of a graphic has to be checked and double checked by a few people. Cartoons, I'm not sure. I haven't seen any cartoons in technical reports. That's a lot of fun, but they're better in other kinds of reports and I think in presentations. But yes, of course, it's not just maps and sections that have a place in technical reports. You need other, you know, things that display information well, and you know, charts and diagrams do that.
Mm-hmm. Another question from Ernie: is it better to edit your own material or have someone else review it? That's been answered, but let's have your answer. Is it better to edit your own material or have someone else review it?
Well, both probably. No, everybody has to edit their own material. We kind of edit before we speak if we're smart, you know. But as far as something that's for disclosure, you absolutely have to have it looked at by yourself and other people. Unless you're a one-person company, you know, there's got to be somebody else that can give you some feedback. And it doesn't have to be a good writer, but it does have to be a good reader. Sometimes they don't know what's wrong, but they just know that something's not right. And then it's your job to go in and find out what it is. But I think as a first pass, you should check over your own writing before you hand it off to somebody else as a courtesy, to make sure that it's as good as polished as you can make it, and then hand it off to someone else to see if they understand it the way that you're intending it. Some other people are very bad writers and they might give you very useless comments. And that's where the fun of working in an office is.
Yes, yes, yes. Well, I think the, okay, there's last additional from Brian Pullman again. Peer review is critical, especially for any public disclosure documents. That's a comment rather than a question. Which brings me to another point for Jackie or for Dave Robson. Are we able to share the chat with people? Because we could capture quite a lot of useful information there.
Yeah, we are able to save that and share it if that's what's needed.
Okay. Maybe anybody who doesn't want their comments shared could put that in at the bottom, just because there have been some useful pointers which I haven't fully talked about. There is one more comment from Simona, who ultimately lets disclosure writers know that their writing doesn't hit the mark?
The reader.
The reader or the boss?
Let's say you put out a news release. Let's say, well, I'm not going to name names, but let's say you put out a news release today and you think it's the best thing ever for your company and your share price drops 50%. Well, that's who just commented on the quality of your writing. You didn't communicate yourself properly. Hopefully you get somebody else to check it first before it hits the market. So ultimately, readers will tell the writer if they if they got it wrong. But I don't think you really want to let it go that far. I mean, you should have, you know, some well-spoken person with you know, good tips for I hate to say it, but a lot of times people who are educated in Britain have a better grasp of how to write well than perhaps people educated in North America. So it's often worthwhile having a Brit on your staff or somebody that can read over and clean it up a bit for you. So I know that's inappropriate for me to say, but I found it to be true.
I guess I could jump in and say the importance of investor relations as well, who is, you know, that person or that team is responsible for going over all the disclosure often and putting things together at sort of the final front after it's gone through legal and all the C-suite, whoever needs to see it on the technical side.
That's where we hit the three dogs with a stick. So you've often got, you know, the legal parts that's pulling this way, the disclosures, the IR people are pulling that way. You got the writer who just found the rock and is, you know, check the assay, who's pulling a third way. Ultimately, well, the last people who do check it before it goes out are is the investor relations group, and hopefully they're you know, they're not just decent writers, but they're team people. You definitely don't want bad misinformation going out just because it sounds good.
Right.
Yeah, very often it's asking yourself a question, could this be read a different way? And if it can be, then you actually have to clarify, because you don't want it to be read different ways.
Everything can be read a different way, as we've noticed with the baseball quotes there. It could have meant anything.
I've just got one question, and I'm going to say that this is the last one from Simona. Have you noticed any trends in how disclosure writing has changed?
I'm not a good person to ask about that because I only got into disclosures in the last 10 years of my career. Before that, I was writing in magazines, and before that, I was, you know, writing as a student or writing as a field person, writing those reports. So I only watched disclosures over 10 years, but what I would say is that the advent of BRIEX caused a lot of people who were saying crazy stuff in news releases to tone it back, or at least cause the securities commissions to reprimand groups that were promising more than they could back up with. You know, the whole advent of 43-101 and the qualified persons and all of that changed what decent companies and what most companies are willing to disclose and how they disclose it. And this is not a promo, but I'd have to say I was always very impressed with how things were worked out at the company I worked for the last 10 years. How it wasn't the letter of the law, it was the spirit of the law. You know, they felt it was important to disclose enough so that any reasonable investor could know all the information they needed to make a choice. I think that's really important, and I don't think that that company is alone in that at all. I think that tends to be the trend now. It probably wasn't anything close to that in the 60s and 70s and 80s, and maybe even the 90s.
Mm-hmm. We have a couple of other comments, but I think basically everything that's been put here has been answered.
Oh, hang on. Here's one from Bishnu Mishra. What's the simplest formula to write well? I have no idea, but I would say it's just to speak clearly. Really, we learn to speak before we learn to write, and we have to we have to speak clearly or nothing gets done in our lives. So I'd say the simplest formula to write well is to say it and then write it down. Often you can mess it up by editing it after you've written it down. I've found that. The best things are often just presented verbally and then captured, and not filled with too much after that.
Okay, thank you, and thank you for picking that one up. I was missing it. And Dennis Waddington has added both the TSX and the OSC promote the use of plain language in quotes to provide some guidelines to what they mean, or at least he says in brackets, they used to. And I think that is probably correct. So at this point, I would like to thank Jane very much for her presentation, and to the audience for all your comments and questions. It's promoted some interesting discussion and some I think, as is often the case, some very useful insight that has come subsequent to the formal presentation itself. So thank you very much indeed for addressing all of those questions and comments, Jane. And as Jackie says, it will be recorded and there is a means to capture the chat as well.
Okay.
So with that, thank you very much indeed. We've enjoyed it. Thank you.
You're welcome. Bye-bye.